Good morning to you. The sun rose, didn't it? Despite the pearl clutching, woe is me, it's terrible, it's a disaster coverage yesterday of a commercial decision by a foreign company to axe operations, news operations here in New Zealand at one of its subsidiaries, which was costing it tens of millions of dollars a year. That's the brutal reality of what happened. And because a lot of the people who worked there have been in your living rooms and on your mobile phones for a long time, I guess they emote a little bit more about being made redundant than someone who works in a freezing works or somewhere else. And collectively, 300 jobs is a lot to go at one stage and at one time. And you cannot help, and I know a lot of the people who'll be affected, you cannot help, and I cannot help as a human being feeling sympathy and empathy for them. But another narrative is springing up around the demise of Newshub, which really is the last remaining vestige of TV3. TV3 that launched back in November of 1989, where I was 25 years old, and working with Bill Ralston in the press gallery at TV3, and in awe of the fact that I was in an enterprise such as that. Really, the end of Newshub, which was or had been 3 News, operated out of the same building, is really the end of TV3, I think, in New Zealand. And what has Discovery, Warner Brothers become? It becomes a branch office of people who make movies and content. And it really is, in some ways, the death of an experiment or a period in New Zealand media history. Others have said, and our legacy media and those who were in the same camp, if you like, as Newshub, have said it's a dark, dark day for journalism. All this talent will be wasted. And I guess also we picked through the reasons this happened, and I think there is no one single reason. And it is not a time to look for blame, but analyse the context in which this change has occurred. Now, I'm very grateful to my next guest for coming on. I'd wanted him on all week because we had been having, I guess, in a professional sense, a bit of a brouhaha about some comments he made about coverage of Winston Peters. And he wouldn't come on over that, and then his news outlet published a piece which I took exception to one little piece of, and they were good enough to correct that and apologise to me yesterday. And he's a guy I've known a long time and a guy I worked with and worked for at TV3. And I think one of the people with the best perspective, or one of the more interesting perspectives on what happened yesterday. So a very warm welcome to the platform, not for the first time actually, to the former head of news at TV3, also former bureau chief in Christchurch at TV3, current and the founding co-editor of the Newsroom media site, Mark Jennings. Mark, how are you? You've been busy, mate. You've been talking everywhere.
Yeah, it's been a busy day yesterday, Sean, and probably also one today, because I guess I'm one of those, like you, I'm one of those few people who were there right at the start and has remained in the media through till today. So, and yes, having run the news organisation, I guess I do have a perspective. And of course, I've watched the company, as you indicated, evolve, change, regress, progress over the years.
Yeah, and as have I, and I've dipped in and out and spent quite a lot of time there in various roles. Mark,
yes,
first, I just do want to address, because of that shared history we have, and I got to say, I had to spend a little bit of time feeling really some emotion at what happened yesterday, because it was a big part of my professional development and life. It was life-changing for me and informed almost everything I've done since in my journalistic career. And I was really touched to read a piece on LinkedIn by Gordon Harcourt, who is now the PR person for Woolworths, so he's dealing with rats and mice. But remember Gordon, and he wrote this lovely little piece, and he said, well, I was like, I was a foundation pupil. I was the lowest person. I was the assistant chief of staff. And he said, I was in awe, and I worked with, people like Bill Ralston and Mark Jennings and all these others. And Sean Plunket. He goes, yes, you were MSM back then, Sean. And he told the great story, Mark. And our first boss, Rod Pedersen, who was a hell of a character, and I know a great supporter of yours, and you sort of filled his shoes when Rod moved on.
Yes.
But Gordon said he questioned our perhaps excessive use of some coverage of some dead bodies lying on a farm where the owner of the farm had gone nuts and killed his family. And apparently he piped up in the newsroom, and you may have been there, and said, should we be using those shots too much? Isn't that a bit gratuitous? And Rod Pedersen turned around and growled at him, what are you, a pussy? And that became Gordon's nickname for, I think, the rest of his time at TV3. You were in the newsroom.
Yes, I was there because I had been, and this is typical of TV3, I'd started as bureau chief in Christchurch, but the bureau chief in Wellington had run into a bit of a problem with booze, and Rod, in his typical style, had asked me to be bureau chief of both.
That's right.
So I was in the newsroom, and it was the Schaffler
that's
murders
right.
in Central, and Gordon's recounting of that is exactly correct. And Rod would have been standing there smoking a cigarette.
Or drinking. Let's be honest, 6 o'clock, and maybe sometimes earlier we would drink. So it was and I tell that story because it's a different world that we live in now. It was 35 years ago. I responded to it, Mark, on LinkedIn, and I said, yep, it touched and altered the course of many lives, mine included. But we weren't the mainstream media then, Gordon. We were the scrappy outsiders, underdogs speaking truth to power and changing the world. We stood for freedom of speech and non-conformity. We stood against government control, and we battled a state-backed giant. We strove for the truth. We didn't take government money, practice cancel culture, or turn off our comment section. And then I said, in life and in news, change is the only constant. So I'm saying that the TV3, or what TV3 became and what ended yesterday, is not what it started out as. And, maybe there are other mavericks and underdogs who are going to fill this vacuum.
Yes, maybe there are. And I think, though, to your point, is that there was a special esprit de corps, and there was a special culture that formed out of what you've been talking about. I remember going to Arrowmana with you.
Yeah, geez.
Myself. There was you, me, and Mel Reid.
Yeah.
And while we were trying to put things together with pieces of wire and string, TVNZ and Paul Holmes had a whole OB van sitting up above Arrowmana Broadcasting.
And you were running up to a feed point somewhere, God.
Yes. So that bred a certain attitude and toughness in TV3 staff, and it became, I think, news, and this goes back to your introduction as well, news became the heart and soul of TV3.
TV3, that's right.
And without that now, I agree with you, I don't think TV3 really exists anymore. I think it's going to be a cable channel run out of Los Angeles. They already play most of the programming out of Los Angeles. There won't be anybody here, really, apart from perhaps a few salespeople. So it is a very sad ending,
Mark,
I think.
I thought there was some wiggle room on things like perhaps Paddy Gower's stuff, the stuff funded by New Zealand On Air, not the PIJF, the Nation and stuff. But I guess without the existing news infrastructure being there, you just can't make them.
Very difficult to make anything without that existing infrastructure and the sort of well-oiled machine that that exists when it's there. So I think it's possible that those programs could be done and basically potentially done in outside production houses, really. But yeah, I agree. It won't be easy.
Yeah, Mark, I was also going to ask you, I think, a very important question. It is my understanding that to have a television broadcast licence in New Zealand, you must provide some news and current affairs. It's a statutory requirement of the business.
Look, it was. I don't know if that's still the case. I know it was one of the conditions, I think, of the original licence.
Yeah.
But it's a very good point. Look, to be honest, I don't think it matters because television has so changed, and we have so many different players in the market. Offering.
Well, I've got to
so
put it to you, Mark. The real truth and one of the big factors in this evolution, I'm not going to call it a tragedy or disaster. It is on a personal level for those who lose their jobs. It's never pleasant. You know that. I know that. But you get through it, and you find new doors to walk through. That's just the truth of it. But the fact is, this is as much about the death of terrestrial broadcasting and its dominance in the media marketplace. It is as much about the rise of the internet. It is much about the attitude of what I call legacy media, and I guess in some ways we were debating, even though you wouldn't show up earlier this week. It happens in a time of change where audiences are different, diverse, and dots. They're dots on a demographic map. And no longer can we expect through monolithic media organisations that you can get them all. People consume news. The idea of the 6 o'clock news to me is dead. Right?
Look at all these things that you're talking about have been playing out for some time. I would say almost the last 10 years.
Yeah, I would too.
And